the Nigerian authorities, which have now asked social media platforms looking to operate in the country to register as a local company under the hand of the Corporate Affairs Commission, or the CAC, and also be licensed by the Broadcasting Commission, or NBC. Let's stick to the registration side, because the registration and the licensing rules, which is expected to include Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, and other social media platforms, result from that indefinite suspension of Twitter in Nigeria a few days ago. The question is, how will these requirements or demands by the Nigerian government play out in real business and investment terms? Let's start this two-part conversation with Johnson Chukwu, policy analyst and CEO at Cowrie Asset Management. Johnson, good evening. Thanks for coming through.
Good evening, Boston, and thank you for having me.
Very interesting time we live in. What is the position of the Companies and Allied Matters Act on business registration for foreign companies or entities in Nigeria? Give us that background.
If you look at the CAMA 2020, Section 78 to Section 84, it specifies that every company, every foreign company registered outside the country that wants to carry on business in the country must take steps or take measures to be incorporated as a business entity in Nigeria. So that's Section 78, unless such company is granted an exemption by the Minister of Trade.
So I'm just going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there, Johnson. I'm going to stop you there, right there. Thank you, respectfully. So, who wants to carry on business in Nigeria? Would you consider me using an app, which is Twitter, Facebook, email by Google? Do you consider that as doing business in Nigeria? Or is it very sticky?
It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing, Boston, because in the first place, these companies are doing business, are carrying on executing transactions from originating from Nigeria, and ultimately some of them terminating in Nigeria. But they don't have physical presence here, and the medium of their trade execution or business execution is virtual. So you don't have control over them. But unfortunately, the provision of CAMA Section 78 obviously did not take cognizance of the fact that the world has gone virtual, and a lot of business operators in the country may not need to register in the country to operate their business. They don't need to have physical presence here. There are some exemptions to the in CAMA, but those exemptions did not include the likes of Twitter, Instagram, Google. But unfortunately, we need to go back to our law and recognize the fact that we're living in a new milieu, and that you no longer need physical presence to carry on business. As it stands today, that law, if you have to interpret it based on how it was couched, will seem to encompass everybody who is either originating business here or terminating business here. But interestingly, these virtual business operators like Google, Twitter, did not have to have any form of physical presence here to operate.
Okay, so let me stretch that a little bit further. Here I am watching CNN or BBC via DSTV. Will that require CNN or Al Jazeera to set up a broadcast station as a company in Nigeria?
If you cast your mind back to the early 90s, when you had the big dishes, and these dishes were used to rebroadcast signals from many of these global news stations. Yeah. The NBC went after some of those rebroadcasters and wanted them to register. But what you have today, Boston, is that you have an aggregator like DSTV that is now a registered business in the country, and is really transmitting the signals from these global media houses.
Okay, so here we are with MTN, Globalcom, Nine Mobile, Airtel. Are the aggregators as well? Because I need to be on this network to be able to have access to WhatsApp, to Facebook, to Twitter, or LinkedIn.
Yeah, that takes us to the area I wanted to bring up earlier.
Yes, please, go ahead.
That we need to look at our law and recognize we live in a virtual age, in an information technology age. So those who are aggregators, for instance, now that the federal government requested that Twitter should terminate its operation here, what it basically did was call the telcos and ask them to disable Twitter in the country. So it simply means that the telcos are actually the agents of the virtual media. And if we have to tax them, we have to tax them through the telcos. For instance, the government has already imposed taxes on electronic transactions, which could include transactions done on virtually. So the key thing is we cannot compel Twitter to register here, but we can have an oversight on the operation through those who are carrying their signals, like the telcos you just mentioned, MTN, Glo, Airtel, and the Tislat.
What the government says is for these social media platforms, Johnson, to register as a local company under the hand of the Corporate Affairs Commission. What would that involve in brick and mortar, simple English, simple practice? What would that involve in reality, in practice?
What that will entail is that they have to incorporate a Nigerian subsidiary or a Nigerian company that will be registered as a Nigerian limited liability company.
Perhaps by the name Twitter Nigeria Limited, company. Something like that.
Absolutely, something like that. But I'm afraid that might be difficult to accomplish, because if they succumb to that pressure from the federal government of Nigeria, they will be subject to having other countries in the world requiring them to have incorporation in their individual country. And they're going to go around the world incorporating in every nooks and cranny of the world. That will be a tall order. And I think that demand by the federal government was an afterthought. In the first place, it wasn't the issue that led to the federal government suspending Twitter. We must not forget the reason why the federal government suspended Twitter. It was because Twitter pulled down a tweet by our president, and the federal government had to fight back by suspending Twitter. So it had nothing to do with registration. If it was issue of registration, they should have requested them to register. And then if they had failed, probably we can be talking about
Well, Johnson, that's always the first time. Let me play the devil's advocate. That's always the first time. So this is the first time. If you're registering as a limited liability, what else would you need to do? Or Twitter, WhatsApp, others need to do? They need a board of directors.
Yes, they need a board of directors, including a local Nigerian who has to be part of their board of directors, because the company cannot register 100% of foreign shareholders in the country. So they have to have a local representative. They have to have an office address where they must receive, the way they have to receive messages or mails, or their correspondence office address, and they now be subject to Nigerian customs and tariffs, Nigerian laws, and Nigerian tax authority, Nigerian tax and regulations.
We have a lot more to talk about this when we return. Johnson, don't go anywhere. Stand by. Stand by, everyone, too. We'll be right back in 2. Also, let's continue that conversation, trying to make a business case for the Nigerian authorities, asking Twitter, WhatsApp, and other social medias to put their boots on the ground in Nigeria and be registered and be licensed. But I was talking about the registration side. Let's leave the licensing for another day. Johnson Chukwu, the CEO at Career Asset Management. Johnson, tell me about the general principle of business and investment registration on one hand versus oversight and control by government and its agencies. How do we balance the two here in a way that we do not cut our nose to spite our face?
Okay, in the first place, when you talk of business registration, you are talking of an incorporated company or unincorporated business venture registering with the registration of agency of a country where it's operating its business or carrying on its business, such that it will have a registration, a certificate of incorporation or certificate of registration, which will be its kind of birth certificate, like a human being, because companies are also treated as entities.
Yes.
As entities, but though they have perpetual life under the law. So gives them a license, just like you say, you have your birth certificate to show you are a citizen of that country. It's give them a citizenship in a country. That's basically what an incorporation is. Depending on the nature of the registration, be it a limited liability company or unlimited liability company, and that will depend on the nature of the business of that organization. In terms of oversight, it is the duty of government to enunciate rules and regulations that will guide the operation of business activities within its own jurisdiction. And that's where regulation comes in, to ensure that companies operate ethically, companies comply with tax obligations, companies respect the laws of their country, companies respect the labor force and their workforce appropriately. These are the rules of regulators. It's also the rule of the regulator or the government to ensure that they create an appropriate enabling environment for businesses to thrive, to make profit, and to grow. So that's where regulation comes in. It's creating the right environment for business to operate effectively and cost efficiently. That's the duty of the government. But the registration itself or incorporation is to have the right to operate as a citizen of a country by a corporate organization.
But what are the best practices out there globally for us to imitate here in where we are right now in the middle of this?
Well, if you talk of companies that are operating in the virtual space, what other countries have done is that they found ways to tax their services that originate from their country or are consumed by their citizens or citizens within their customs union. They have found ways to tax those services. But in terms of compelling those companies to operate as companies registered within the economic jurisdiction of different countries, that has not been the case. You have instances where some of these companies decided on their own to incorporate and have some physical presence in some countries, depending on how attractive those countries are. For instance, Amazon is in UK because it distributes some of its own products from UK. It uses UK as a base to distribute to some parts of Europe. But it's at its own volition, not as a compulsion from the government. So the key thing we're missing is that we want to compel organizations to get incorporated in Nigeria, while our focus should be to incentivize companies to come and set up here and come in willingly and create jobs. You can't compel companies to come to your country. And I can tell you, if we do the wrong things, if we continue to do the wrong things, we have the tendency, we run the risk of being sent back to the Stone Age, where we're cut off from modern society. Today, most Nigerians are not using Twitter or using it within the sphere of the law. And I think that's a constraint. It's hobbling some form of social and economic engagement of Nigerians. And the government must recognize that. It serves as a disincentive for people to do business in the country. So if we continue with such draconian actions, we will be scaring away investors instead of encouraging them to come back to the country.
I was talking about investments. I think to say it's more like a romance thing. Don't force it. Let it happen naturally. That's how that old song goes, isn't it? Don't force it. Just let it come naturally, and it comes to you, because it comes to the one where it's well treated. Now it looks like we want to use the law to force companies to register in Nigeria, domicile here, become incorporated. But what about the pursuit of tax? And you're talking about that earlier, because we seem to be talking about that before the current face-off with Twitter.
Yes, you know that the Finance Act made provision for the taxation of electronic business activity, electronic transactions.
Yes.
And that means a transaction you execute, maybe you make your purchase through Amazon or any of these online trading platforms or online supermarkets, you have to still pay your tax. It also means that if you buy services from Google or buy services from Amazon, any of these platforms, you will pay tax in the country. So there is already a provision under the Finance Act of 2020 for such taxes to be paid by those who are using e-payment platforms. So that has been addressed, and I think what we need to do is to ensure that we have the supporting technology to track and trap transactions originating in the country or where service is consumed by Nigerians or such services are terminating in the country. So we need to do that, and I'm sure the government can generate its revenue. But the key thing, if the government is focusing on revenue, is to actually drive traffic through those channels so that the volume of transactions will increase and government be able to track and trap more taxes instead of scaling away transactions from those channels.
I get your point. Yeah, because the more transactions you do, the more engagements you do on social media and all of that. If you do a social media tax, well, you get more money because folks are doing a whole lot in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, online trading, and what have you. But put all of this together for me in our pursuit of ease of doing business. How does this latest, let me just try to find another word. Well, how do you put all of this together? We are doing ease of doing business. Will it come with that ease of doing business now, forcing everyone to do registration and licensing?
Well, in the first place, like I said, I do not think the government may succeed in compelling all virtual platforms to register in the country. But in terms of ease of doing business, I think it's a blip on the improvement we've seen on ease of doing business. Because what will happen is that it will be a deterrent for people to come in and even incorporate in the country. Because where laws can be executed or levied arbitrarily, then it puts a scare on investors because there is no existing law that the government has said, like what I said earlier, you needed to have engaged them, requested them to get registered, and if they fail, you give them a timeline to comply, after which you can now sanction them. But if the government can respond suddenly based on some irritation, then that will serve as a disincentive for ease of doing business. If you even look at our ranking,
I get your point. It has to be a business case, an investment case, not an irritation case. Yeah, don't make certain decisions when you're upset. That's what we learned. Thank you so much. We appreciate your analysis on the show tonight. As always, Johnson Chukwu, CEO at Carrier Asset Management. Have a pleasant evening.